Okay, going on live soon.
Okay.
Yep. So let's wait for a while.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I can hear your teacher talking in the
Oh,
background.
so just give me a minute.
Yeah. Hello, parents. This is Coach John here from Learning Out of the Box, and thank you so much for being here. And I hope that you have a great holiday. We know that's now all of us are stuck in Singapore. Yeah. Okay. So today, we are still committed to share with you because we want to support you, especially we know that you are a parent who teach your child maths at home. Yeah. At the same time, today I have the privilege of having my good friend Dan. Hello, Dan.
Hi, John.
Okay, so let me just introduce Dan first, and then they will take it away from there. Okay, Dan is one of the coolest guy I've ever met.
Thank you.
Yeah. I can see that. Wow, because he actually has a center that is called KidStartNow. Yeah, and they use AI, artificial intelligence, to help children ace learning Chinese. Isn't that cool? Okay, then could you share with us like how you actually started off using AI, or even how you actually started off having this idea of using AI to teach Chinese? Because I think when we talk about getting help for our children with Mandarin, we are talking about, okay, which tutor is good,
Mm.
what techniques does she use,
Yep,
and
yep.
what book can she use, and what book can she buy? Yes, over back to you.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, definitely. So maybe let me first start by introducing like how I actually got into building a Chinese enrichment center first, because that's how we started.
Awesome.
So unlike most Chinese centers, which are started by Chinese tutors, I hated Chinese, and actually a lot of my team, the non-teachers, I mean, from our designers to our programmers, they all also had this fear of Chinese when they were young. So I was interestingly so like I actually had a scholarship, and I was given the opportunity to study engineering in America on a scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
And in America, obviously, my Chinese standard became even worse, right? So, but then after that, I worked for a couple of years in Taiwan. And when I was in Taiwan, I realized that, hey, Chinese is actually a very beautiful language. It's just that maybe the way that we were taught it in school, which is a lot of, rote learning, a lot of memorizing, can be quite boring and not very suitable for young kids these days, especially because, back in our time, a lot of people spoke Chinese, right? And even if you didn't speak Chinese, it was such that if your parents ask you to learn, you will just learn. But
Mm-hmm.
the generation right now is very, I would say they're smarter than us in the sense that you can't just tell them to memorize your things here. You need to motivate them, and you need to, kind of encourage them into doing it, right? So that was the initial stimulus as to, why we, created Kickstart Now in the very first place. So being a tech background, we started by having a physical classroom and using various tech tools to make the learning process more fun. So, be it from, having digital games in a classroom, or, revising at home. But then one thing we realized that was quite important, which was that it is no matter how much you do in the classroom, it's only 1 hour, 45 minutes or 2 hours at most, right? And a lot of the learning process comes from revising at home as well. Just because Chinese, unlike, something like English, is something that kids can be quite unfamiliar with, especially if they use English at home. So we started building up an internet, like an online learning portal for kids to revise, and then we started building from there. And then I think it was about 2 years ago that one parent actually, was mentioning to me was that, hey, you know what? As parents, we are really so busy, right?
Yep.
And
I
I do not.
agree. Two hands.
Yeah, exactly, right. So like and it's not easy for parents to want to go back home and revise Chinese with your child. But let's say you really do that. Let's say you
Yep.
say, okay, I have half an hour, I'm going to revise Chinese. But what exactly do you revise? How do you prioritize your revision time? So let me tell you what most parents will do, and I'm quite sure many parents will recognize this, which is you revise what is tested tomorrow. So if
Mm.
you have things here tomorrow, you just revise this.
Yep.
So what happens the next week? Do you revise last week's things here? No, you don't, because you're busy, and next week got another things here as well. But what happens is that kids tend to eventually forget.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do some research on something called the forgetting curve,
Mm-hmm.
it's actually done by a German psychologist about 2 centuries ago. But it has been very instrumental for learning languages, and all the top learning apps use it. The concept is when you first learn something, a language or even math or science, you forget half of it by tomorrow. And that's actually one of the reasons why many parents complain that, hey, no matter how hard I learn, my child can ace the things here tomorrow, but the following day he forgets like most of it, right? And so the way you get past this is the next time you revise it, you actually stays in your brain for a much longer period of time. So hence the concept of a forgetting curve. And what you need to do is to optimize the time when you revise it such that just when your child is about to forget, they revise it over and over again. Now you can do this physically at home. You can take out like a notebook and start saying that, okay, my child revised, this chapter on Monday, and I'm going to revise with him on Thursday. And then next Thursday you say that, okay, he knows the first half well. He doesn't know the second half that well. So the half that he knows, I revise it 2 weeks later. The half that he doesn't know, I revise it maybe tomorrow. It's a very menial process, let's put it this way. So what we've done is that we've used technology to kind of like track every single question that your child does, and there's a system that automatically optimizes how he should learn. So I guess the easy summary you think of it is that, do you have Spotify, or do you watch Netflix?
Or you're asking me, right?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Yes, and I watch Netflix. Yeah.
Yeah, so like every time you use like Spotify, there's you have a personal playlist of like, these are the songs that you should be listening to, right? And it's based on whatever you like. So let's say if you recently like Korean songs, they will just give you like a list of Korean songs based on your interests. So that's exactly what we do. So every time you answer questions, there's an AI system that tracks, hey, maybe this child should be revising XYZ more, and as you update it, the system will just learn about you and update accordingly. So yeah, that's the gist of how we came to start using AI into our online learning systems as well as our physical classrooms.
Great. Yeah. Okay. So at the same time, let me say hi to many parents who are already online, even though it's office hour. Yeah. Hi, Jeffrey, and also a good friend, and also other parents who are online. Do drop us a like if you are there, so that we can say hi to you. And today we have Dan, who's a founder of KidStartNow, and we're talking about how to use AI. And I think eventually it's really very much on strategies that we parents have access to help our children do well in Chinese. Yeah, and I almost want to say maths. Yeah, I'm so used to saying.
Actually,
yeah. Okay, so parents, if you like what we are doing, and you think that this Facebook Live can benefit more parents, do help us to do a share so that more parents can benefit from it. Because anyway, this is free, and we just want to support you parents who teach your children maths. And we know that in reality, our children not only do with maths but also stresses on Chinese. And again, from my experience, many children really don't like Chinese. So then how do you make use of AI to even spur the interest of learning Chinese in most children?
Well, let me tackle that question in two different ways, right?
Sure,
So
awesome.
the first is, how do you get kids generally interested in the language, and how does artificial intelligence help to make the process more efficient? So let me start first by saying that the most important thing you need to do with learning a new language, okay, depends on the age group, all right? So let me tackle this from a younger age group and an older age group. So let's say if your child is anywhere, let's say in preschool. Let's start with preschool first. The most important thing you need to do is to make the language meaningful for them. I think many preschool parents tell me that the biggest problem is that they only speak English at home, or when they try to get their kids interested in learning Chinese, when they go to the library, for instance, the kids tend to come back with like all English books and no Chinese books, right? So I mean, any parent who has done some sort of a PTR, a parent-teacher meeting, right?
Yep.
You probably have heard this. Parents try to devote more time speaking Chinese, try to read more Chinese, try to use more Chinese songs and stuff. But you will find that 80% of parents, even though they try, their kids just aren't interested, right? So the first and most important thing, right, is to try to make Chinese less in a more encouraging and less stressful way. So the biggest tip that one of the teachers told me is to try to never criticize kids when they're trying to use the language, because it's I'll give you an example. So let's say a child comes to you and he says, he tries saying a particular Chinese word and he pronounces it wrong, for instance.
Yep.
It's very common for parents to straight away say, that is not the correct pronunciation, this is how you should pronounce it. But actually, we mean the best. Obviously, we want the kids to pronounce it correctly. But what happens is that kids will eventually start to feel that, hey, I get discouraged and stuff. So one thing you can do is you can first praise the child for being willing to use a language, and then you just repeat what the correct pronunciation. So try to always couch it in a very positive way of learning. For us, what we find is that animated stories work really well for preschool kids, because there is actually a gap in. I think as John, as a parent, I'm sure that when you try to go to popular bookstore and you try to get Chinese stories for kids, one thing you might realize is that the kind of stories that your kids are interested in terms of content, they might not be able to understand it in Chinese. And what they can understand in Chinese, the content is so simplistic for them. And that is a common problem for many parents, both for preschool and primary school. And that's because the books that you see in popular bookstore are actually written for native speakers, not for Singaporean parents. So what we found is that animated stories are a good way around it, because even if they don't fully understand, they're still immersed with sound and animation. And kids learn like a sponge. Not like us, as adults, when we learn a language, we kind of have to, go through vocab lists and stuff. Kids don't have to. As long as you can get them interested in doing it, they will continue to absorb. So for preschool kids, encouragement, try to use animated stories. These are things that we found to be very useful. Now, primary school is a challenge it's a bigger challenge if your child has entered primary school without a proper foundation and liking for the language. Okay, so which is why we always tell parents, if you have preschool kids, start young. It really makes a huge difference. But now let's say you get to primary school, right? And so your kid comes in and he says that, hey, I hate writing Chinese. I hate doing the homework. I hate doing spelling, right? So a common problem for many parents. Right?
Sounds so familiar.
Because it affects every single parent, really. It's just a intensity level. So for us, what we found actually works is two things. The first is making sure that your child feels that the teacher truly cares about the child. And I think as a teacher yourself, I'm sure you notice that there are a lot of teachers who kind of do it more like they do teach for the sake of teaching, not really because they have a true passion for the child. And kids are really, really smart. And especially in a subject topic like Chinese, whereby it's not like math, whereby kids are naturally interested in it, or science, whereby it can be naturally engaging. Chinese, I think a lot depends on is there a good connection between the teacher and the child. So I think the first piece of advice is to make sure that there's a very, very strong connection. And that will actually go a very long way. Now, let's say you cannot really change that, or let's say you've really found a good teacher. Now that's where we believe AI comes in, and which is about making the learning process one as interesting as possible and as efficient as possible. So maybe I can do a very quick demo and show you how exactly we, something that has worked for us.
Yeah, please.
So let me share my screen. So I'll give you a very quick example. So for instance, let's say you're trying to get kids to learn idioms, for instance, right? So I think with Chinese, what you want to do, what we find that works is there's a 3-step process in learning anything for Chinese. You want to first be able to recognize the word. And that comes from, if you see the word, do you know what sound it is? Well, this very simplistic recognition, you don't actually know, you might not fully understand what it means, but you get to the step first. Once you understand the recognition portion, then you go on to application questions. Like, can I actually apply this in, let's say, paper 2, for instance? There'll be a multiple choice kind of question, right? And only after that, then you get to, can I use this in writing? Can I use this in my composition essays, or in other formats? And that's where you have very strong mastery. So let's say we're trying to learn idioms, and one thing that we do, very simple. This is the boring one. I'll be very upfront. So the boring portion is whereby you have a sound, and then you test them, and then you make sure you get it correct. And at the very end, you get digital coins or digital diamonds to kind of motivate them. Extrinsic motivation works at the start to get them interested. But then what happens next, right? So what is the next point that we find is try to make it more like a game, because kids really like games, right? Especially for things like Chinese, whereby I know sometimes parents will feel that, hey, is it too much of a game? But we find that if you can get your kids to do assessment book questions, it doesn't really matter what the format is as long as they're practicing, right? So I'll give you an example. So this is something that we used this morning in our holiday camps. And when the first time we showed it, kids were like, oh my God, this is so fun. I'm going home to practice it, right? So what happens is that, every time they want to do they want to participate in like a pet battle, they need to first answer a question, right?
Wow.
So let's say let's say she answers it correctly. So what happens is that their Pokemon or their panda gets to do a small little attack. And what happens if he gets it wrong? I'll show you what happens. So if he gets it wrong, then his attack will actually miss. So we find that this actually gets kids, it incentivizes kids to actually learn the things, because if they actually want to proceed in the game, they actually need to get questions correct. And what we find is that a small little game like this can motivate kids to keep doing either idiom questions or paper 2 questions over and over again, which naturally translates to an improvement in their Chinese standard. And where the artificial intelligence comes in is actually in the back end, which is like determines like what kind of questions should I be asking my child. All of that is handled by a system, and obviously the child doesn't see it because all the child thinks they're doing is like playing a game. Now, of course, it doesn't always have to be digital. If let's say for parents out there who are thinking, how can I do something like that on my own? You can always do that. So one parent of mine, she actually did this. She had a Monopoly game, but instead of rolling dice, we had to do idiom questions. So if the child wanted to proceed, they needed to answer a question. So you answer a question, then your little token that actually moves forward. It's kind of like rolling a dice. So she's replaced the whole dice rolling mechanic with doing Chinese questions. And kids, they don't get bored about it because they feel they're playing a game and they get to interact with their parents. Yeah, so small little things like that is definitely things that parents can do at home as well.
Yeah. So for the parents who are watching this, I think what I took away from what Dan said is you got to first understand what your kids like. I mean, yes, we were talking about to gamify it, but at the same time, I think what really matters here is what does your child likes to do. Yeah, like for example, sometimes because I know that my kids like ice cream. Yeah, so
every single child likes ice cream.
Yeah, so I would say that, hey, if you get this correct, or if you get 10 correct, maybe we can go out and get your favorite ice cream.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, gamification or gamified rewards definitely works to a certain extent. And I guess something that I want to touch upon, which I found interesting, is that let's go back to math and science, right? So math and science are naturally quite interesting to certain kids. But what we find is that what the part of what gets kids interested in these things is also mastery. Because when they get better at it, every time they answer a problem sum, they get very excited because it reinforces the feeling that they are good at it, right? And what we find is that I know sometimes the reason why we use small little rewards first to get them to do things is because that drives a process of improvement. And once kids start to feel that, hey, I'm actually getting better at Chinese, or I'm actually good at Chinese, that actually drives an intrinsic motivation for them to actually learn. So I think as an educator, of course, we're always worried about what part of motivation is intrinsic and what part is extrinsic, right? But what we find is that it's not that easy to to just drive straight into intrinsic motivation for something like Chinese if the kids naturally do not really like it or they don't use much of the language at home.
Okay. Okay, check in with you. Do you have anything else to share about this website? Because if not, you can come up from this share screen.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah, sure.
Okay, sure. Just
a quick thing. So I just wanted to share with all the viewers here that we are happy to provide a free trial of our system. And just now one thing that we mentioned, which was for young kids, a great way to drive engagement is actually through stories. So if you can go to our website, we actually do provide short little stories like this. I'll just run through the first.
Sure. Wow, it looks interesting.
Yeah, it's all created in-house actually.
Wow.
Let's jump forward.
Yeah. At the same time, parents, if you are keen to share this with your friend, just help us to share the Facebook post, and then your friends will get benefits from this sharing as well. And then I've pasted the Facebook post in the Zoom chat.
Oh, sure.
Great.
Should I click on it now?
I mean, if you have time, can help us to share in your
Yeah, of course. Just give me a minute.
yeah. So in the meantime, you can actually do sharing. Oh, but you're using the same laptop, right?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, never mind. You can maybe you can do a stop share screen first, and let me just do a summary for the parents. Yeah, based on what you have shared. Yeah, okay. Okay, parents. Today we have Dan, who's a co-founder of. As I think you're the founder, right? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, the principal. Yeah. The principal and co-founder 校长
Coffee
of
maker.
Kickstart Now. Sorry again.
And the coffee maker.
Coffee maker. Nah, you are the spear leader. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So today we are talking about AI because I think that in today's world, especially this year, so many things have changed and in the truth, there are so much expectations on our children to study at home, and it's not just Chinese per se. It's across the four subjects. And even for myself as a parent, I do have difficulty trying to get my kids to learn because end up I'm a teacher at home and I got to teach my kids on top of my work commitments. Yeah. So if you have any questions for Dan about how to gamify your teaching process at home, it may or may not be related to AI. Yeah. But I think that why we're doing this is to support parents who teach their children maths at home and other subjects too. So please ask us questions so that we can answer it as in a way that can really address your needs. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So back to you, Dan.
Yep.
So you ready to share the next
Yeah,
part
of course.
of storytelling? Yeah. And I guess that storytelling also works for older kids. I mean, it really depends on how you share it and how animated you are.
Yeah, for sure. We even have up to kids up to P3, P4 who love the stories, and they use it as a way to improve their vocabulary. And for us, I think anything works really, because as long as kids are using or like interacting more with Chinese, we see it as a huge win, right?
Yeah.
So I think part of, maybe let me emphasize one more thing about AI, is that a lot of about AI is actually hidden behind the platform. So what you can think of it in a way of like what you see is what the kids like to do, and where the technology comes in really is about how do you take what the kids are doing and then you try to personalize a learning pathway for every single child. Because one thing that we truly believe in is that every single child is unique, right? Particularly for language, because some it doesn't matter if they're all in P2, for instance, or P3, because every child's interaction or usage of Chinese is different, right? Some kids they lack, so maybe they don't have as much exposure. Some of the kids are really strong. So that's where you have an algorithm that automatically tracks how good or how much improvement you require and personalizes like like a learning journey for you actually is useful. So part of that is actually through stories. So one of the things that we do, let's just do a very simple one. So So as you mentioned just now, so like I'll just do a very quick just 15 seconds. You can just see what we try to do is we try to make the process even of the story with read aloud, with animation and with sound, because the idea is that we understand that parents are busy, right? Parents don't have time to always sit there and go through every single story with their kids. And also some parents have also told us that they're not confident of reading stories to their kids in Chinese. Either they cannot read every single word, or they are not sure if their pronunciation is perfect. Right. So that's why we have read aloud. And we find that we have kids who love the story so much that they watch it day in, day out. So every day, like 15, 20 minutes. So nothing excessive, but they just do this. And after they finish watching a story, what they do is that they can do a short little quiz. So this is a read aloud quiz. I'll just quickly go through. I'll show you what happens when you finish everything. So let's say you get something wrong. You get to see a small little you get to see a short little video explanation of the word. So this is we have a teacher explanation of what exactly 小鸟 means, and it's just a good way to improve, to revise, because what we find is that, let's say if a child doesn't understand a word and you just tell them, okay, it's not 小鸟, it's mama or whatever, it doesn't really help because they don't know what these two words mean anyway, right? So what better way to then to have a short, 30-second or 1-minute video explaining exactly what this vocab means. We don't do this for all the vocabs, we only do this for some of the vocabs, but we find it very helpful in getting kids to really to reinforce whatever that they need to know. So I'll just quickly go through and show you. Sorry, just a minute. So at the end, so you can just claim small little rewards like coins and diamonds and pets. And at the end of the day, this goes back to what we talked about, small little rewards to get kids interested. And one final thing is that, so what happens with all the short quizzes that they do is that when they do a short daily challenge, so let's say the daily challenges can come in word recognition, can come in assessment book questions, but let's say for word recognition questions, all the questions that you are tested are basically what you need to know based on, what all the previous quizzes you've done, what you right, what you've wrong, how much you've forgotten and stuff. So there's a mathematical formula that calculates everything for you. So that's for my screen sharing. That's basically it.
Yeah. So just to break down the process for the parents, actually what I like about what you shared is first, I think you use animation to in a storytelling mode to share with the child what is the lesson for today. Yeah. So get the child to be immersed in the story first, and then along the way you share with them a quiz, or the child or rather the child has a choice to do the quiz. And if he gets correct, good, he get rewards in bite size. Yeah. If he gets wrong, there's an explanation for that, which a teacher will come on board and to share with the child. But I think what I like about that is it's not just very much on getting the child to pronounce it correctly, but it's explaining from scratch.
Yep, exactly. You do a better job explaining it than I do.
No. I think because I really like what you're doing, so I really want to break it down for parents. Again, this is what we do because maths itself, like the process behind your AI is all process driven.
True, fair enough.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so I think at the same time, because I think in most parents world, and being a parent myself, because right now we are also trying to cut down the screen time for our kids, and yet the school, in my opinion, is throwing so much of this access that, and sometimes I get so lost in the sense of I have no idea how many access my kids have in the 101 portals that the school is giving them. Now, they have Kahoot, they have SLS, and sometimes my kid asks me, Papa, what is my password? I told her, how do I know? So how so if your parents come to you and she says, hey, then I really like what you're doing. Yeah, but how do you actually balance the usage of this on top of the other online platforms that our children already have access to?
That's actually a very good question, and let me just start by saying that I also believe that screen time should be limited. I don't think it's having the last thing you want to do is to have kids addicted to web portals or games as well, even no matter how educational it is. So for us, what we do try to limit the maximum number of rewards you can get. So basically, if you do a certain number of quizzes, any quiz you go beyond that gets you 0 rewards anyway. So I think for us, that's one way to limit, because there's no incentive to do anything beyond that. Another thing that we do tell parents is that even when you learn a language like Chinese, right, it is not the be all end all is not digital, right? Digital is simply a tool that gets you somewhere. So when we tell parents, so sometimes parents will ask me this question, right? Not exactly the question you're asking, but similar. Is like, hey, if my kid only watches digital stories, would they be unwilling to actually read physical stories? That means, would they, do poorly in comprehension because there's no animation, no sound, right? And that was actually something we were very worried about many years ago when we first started. But through the years, we found that actually is not an issue, because we find that the biggest problem for many kids, the reason they don't read a physical story is because they are unable to do so, because they don't have the vocabulary foundation. I mean, let's say me, right, when I tried to read Jing Yong, right, a long time ago, it was very painful because my Chinese was not that good. So every single line I had to actually take out a 词典 and check every single word. That was when
Yep.
I was first learning.
Yep.
Right? And it's definitely painful for kids. But what we find is that when kids use digital stories and they build their foundation, it's very easy for them to translate that to reading physical stories. In the same way, I think the goal of a digital platform is really just to get their vocabulary up to speed. And after that, they can do anything that they want with it. And of course, with any sort of, rewards and stuff, we always do tell parents you should always try to ration it. You shouldn't let kids just go crazy with that. And actually, some parents have actually asked me whether I can go one step further and implement like lock features. So like not only just like, because we have a soft lock whereby pass a certain number of quizzes you don't get any rewards, but parents have also been asking me, is it possible for me to do like you can only do X number of quizzes before you're completely denied access to the portal. And honestly, that's something that we are looking into, because I think it'll be a useful option for parents who are worried that their kids will get too much screen time.
Mm. And I guess that based on what you have just shared, the keyword is to balance.
Yeah.
And even though that from young, we are so wired to marking over books for the exams, but reading too much books, too much of it, it may backfire, because sometimes kids get anxiety as well as even frights or nightmares.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely agree with you. Now, actually, can I just want to add a quick point, right?
Please go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
Which is, I think sometimes parents, sometimes they do ask me, right? Like, well, what is, if you can only choose, one or two things, what is the single most important thing that I should be focusing on? Okay.
Yep.
And I would say that, let's say if your child is young, so preschool first, the most important thing you can focus on is really speaking and listening. And one of the big mistakes that I see parents do is they focus too much on writing when kids are young. Sometimes it's because sometimes the drawback is their kids, their muscles are not even well formed enough to be writing that much, right? But even if let's say they're a bit older, let's say K1, K2, they're okay with it. Writing too much can actually lead to situations whereby they start to really dislike the language before they even get to primary school, right? And actually, if you look at how the weightage is, technically there are no examinations in P1, but you just look at the checkpoints weightage. The first half is actually a high weightage on speaking and listening and Hanyu pinging, and I would say the large overload of writing doesn't even kick in until the end of the year. So really try to pace it out, and more importantly is that we find that with languages, one thing is very important is meaning, in the sense that one of the examples that has always stayed with me is that I had a friend of mine who was in secondary school and he picked up Japanese. Wow. And we were like, why do you pick up Japanese? And at that time, we were not like, it's not like a lot of tools to learn languages, right? And he said that was because we had PlayStations then, and the Japanese versions, the original versions, would come out earlier, about 3 to 4 months before the American versions. So that was learning Japanese was the only way he could get to play the games the moment they were released. So there was a real meaning to him, right? In the same way, I also had friends who didn't speak a word of Chinese at home. So they only learned Chinese in school, but their Chinese was good. And the reason for that was because at that time, if you wanted to read those Chinese mangas like by Chuang Yi, right, you had to read the Chinese versions. There were no English translations back then. So that was another reason for them to actually use the language. And I think that's something that parents need. What we find is useful is that you need to give meaning and make it concrete to the kids why they need the language. And so for preschool, it's really about speaking and listening, such that they can actually want to watch cartoons, play songs, and so on and so forth. By the way, what does not work is Chinese is important because there are examinations. Chinese is important because China is very big. These reasons do not work for young kids. And we have seen parents who try it because it works for us, right? It's just like as an adult learner, many parents or many of us, we feel that we regret not learning Chinese when we're young because China is so big important right now. And so for us, that's the meaningful reason to learn Chinese, right? So just think back from a young kid. I think just now John mentioning, like, you need to know what your kid likes. How can you make it meaningful for them? Right? So, but let me so that's for preschool. So for primary school, what is the most important thing you can get kids to focus on? Vocabulary. Vocabulary is the building block for everything. So if you have limited time, just make sure that your child really, really understands every single vocab in the textbook. If you can do that, there's no way that they will do poorly for at least paper 2. Because paper 2, the non-conventional part of paper 2 is really just vocabulary driven. Now, of course, if you are in upper primary, not only do you need to know your textbook material well, you do need to know the lower primary vocab as well, because they do pop up. And that's why, we have AI systems that help you revise better. But if you can get this done, there's no reason why you shouldn't be getting at least 90 to 95% correct for all of the pre-comprehension portion. And comprehension really comes down to reading and skill techniques. And vocabulary will also translate into both the composition portion as well as the oral portion to some extent. And which is why a huge part of our, our online learning system focuses on making sure kids can understand, retain, and apply vocabulary, because that is really the low-hanging fruit.
Anything else?
Yeah,
I'm trying to digest what you have said, so I can use it for myself.
Yeah, just make sure that you get your kids' vocab up there. I mean, as parents, we kind of know this, so we ask kids to, as a P6 parent, parents will just make sure that the kids know every single word in the 词语手册, right?
This is the 词语, is it? Is it same as 词语?
Yeah, 词语, yeah. You just need to know that.
Okay.
No, but the thing is that sometimes parents, they only focus on the current level, but then they forget there's also previous levels as well. So the sometimes where they will ask me like, hey, my child has really learned a textbook. He can know this text before, like like the things here. But how come he still cannot recognize some of the words there? And when I look at the word, it's actually from like 1 year or 2 years back. So it just still pops up. So you just need to make sure that your vocabulary is on point. If your vocab is on point, everything's easy. And that's kind of why as educators, we always encourage parents to read more, because just now we talked about the forgetting curve, right? Forgetting curve talks about whenever you learn something or revise something, you just remember it better, right? So when you read, widely, when you see the word that you've learned some time back, and you see it used again in a different context, you're revising it, and then that word now is embedded in your memory much strongly. So, and it's also easier, what we find, it's easier to, if kids like reading, it's easier to get them exposed to different kind of reading materials as compared to making them read the same textbook 10 times.
Yeah. And also from my own experience, when I heard about other friends who have kids, and a lot of times the family itself doesn't use Mandarin, doesn't speak Mandarin at home. But I think somehow the parents may have some form of expectations that the child gets interested in Chinese. Yeah. So I think there's also an imbalance there, like there's a misfit. So for parents who don't speak Mandarin at home, even though they are Chinese, so what are some of the suggestions that can help the parents to be more involved?
Yeah, for sure. Let me first start by saying that we actually do have quite a number of well, not, I won't say quite a number, but we do have some non-Chinese parents whose kids are actually doing better than Chinese parents. And it's actually quite interesting.
What's the secret?
No, I did actually.
What's the secret?
Yeah, and no, but it's actually interesting because sometimes I'll get referrals from these parents, and then they will call me, and then they will tell me that, hey, XYZ parent referred me, and then they will also complain about their own kid, because they're like, how is it that his child is like Indian and or like Eurasian or European and he does better than my child? And
wow, amazing.
And part of it is that I also tell my moms that, hey, it doesn't really matter where the standard is right now, because that's done, right? What's important is where can we get them going forward. And I think that's why you talk about strategies, right? One thing that I notice about the parents who are of non-Chinese descent is that they take the language very seriously. It's very ironic, actually. You'll be surprised at how many Chinese parents who will come to me with kids, because Chinese parents, like, what's the very first thing you think? The speaking abilities are amazing, for sure. They should have no problem with Chinese.
Yep.
Oral and listening are normally not an issue, but if you actually look at the vocabulary, a lot of them struggle with vocab, because vocab is one of those things whereby it's not something that it's something you need to consciously practice. And a very common thinking is that, hey, my child I'm a native speaker, my child's Chinese will definitely not be a problem. So I'm a little bit biased here because my wife is actually Taiwanese, and so sometimes she'll say that exactly the same thing. She'll be like, our kids will have no problem with Chinese because we will speak Chinese. And I'm like, no, that doesn't work that way.
Are you sure?
You see so many cases.
Like, are you sure?
we've seen that non-Chinese parents or
Yeah.
parents who do not speak Chinese at home, how they can get their kids to actually excel in the language comes in two ways. One is that they must make the kid feel that this is important. The very best that I've seen, but I don't think this is feasible for many parents, is that the mom who's non-Chinese actually learns Chinese with the child. Being left with the mom, the child will feel, hey, this is actually something that's really, really important. But let's say you cannot go that step. What can you do? What I highly recommend is, again, stories, animated stories, physical stories. Try to make it a routine habit with the kid, and make it such that that your child understands that, hey, this is something that is very important both for you and for me, right? And start early is also a very important thing. So one thing that we notice is that the parents who are non-Chinese or they don't speak Chinese at home, how they get their kids to be good at it is that they start at a very, very early age. N1 earlier if possible. If you N2 K1 is also doable. Just make sure that you try to get them that kind of immersion as early as possible. So let's say your child's already in primary school, right? So what's done is done, right? So how can we actually help the kids? I think the most important thing is that I would say, if by any chance you found yourself criticizing your child's Chinese, try not to do it. And I know this sounds very obvious, and you probably might be thinking, there's no way I do that, right? But it's very subconscious. So I give you an example, right? So a lot of times when new parents come to me, right, and even it can be in front of their kids, sometimes it can be over the phone. The first thing that they'll tell me is that my child's Chinese is very, very bad. He's horrible. He cannot do Chinese. He cannot recognize any single word. And sometimes they say it in front of their child. And the thing is that the parents don't even realize they're doing that. So that's my very first piece of advice, is to make sure is to always check yourself and to always remember, you must first believe that your child can improve. The only reason he's doing poorly in Chinese right now is maybe he hasn't found the right teacher, he hasn't found the right method. And together we can help him. And I'm quite sure it's something you can see in math as well, right? I'm sure that sometimes, kids can come in, they can be very weak in Chinese right now, and that's because they haven't, found the proper method. And, with proper encouragement, and as they see their self-improvement, they will naturally get better at it, right?
Yes. As you're saying, I think this reminded me of a story when a mom came to me and saying, "Hey John, I really need your help to boost up my kids' grades in maths." And because I really hate Chinese since young, and I don't like Chinese, and I'm very bad in Chinese. And she's saying this right in front of the child, and she added on, "I have no idea why my child hated Chinese and disliked Chinese." Yeah, because from my experience, I think what the child got out of is he's role modeling after the mother.
No, exactly. I think I think you actually hit the nail on the head. It's something that I've also been thinking about, is that, this is more for English, right? But the parents that, so sometimes parents, they also will just naturally ask, like, how can I get my kids interested in reading English and Chinese, right? And of course, one method that sometimes parents will do is just send them for external help. I can read or what, and obviously this really works as well. But sometimes parents, they say, besides that, what can I do? And I noticed that the parents who themselves like to read naturally have kids who also like to read. And they don't even purposely try to do it. It's just that for them, I think it's what you mentioned just now, that the kids are naturally role modeling the parents, right? So because the parents themselves find reading to be important, kids naturally find reading to be important. So even parents who themselves, let's say you're not very confident in your own Chinese standard, you feel that I might not be able to help, that's fine, right? As long as you can make your child, as long as you yourself feel that, hey, learning Chinese is important, it's something that we know we should definitely take seriously. And Chinese is not something that is horrible. It's easy to get the kids interested in as well, because I think negative emotions can rub off kids very easily. So I mean, like, if parents, if you are thinking that, hey, I hate Chinese when I was young, Chinese is not good, that sort of, and it's very easy. I mean, myself, I hate the Chinese when I was young, but sometimes this can seep off to your child as well. So I think really, and I know this sounds very wishy-washy, it's not concrete, but trust me on this, that the positive attitude towards the language is actually one of the most important things you can do when trying to get kids to be interested in the language.
Awesome. Yes, I think at the same time, what you just shared is also reminded me that as parents, our kids are always following our examples.
For sure.
Yeah. So what we do, we really need to be more conscious because our kids actually follow what we like as well as what we don't like.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, and of course, if let's say we've already done all the steps really, right? So we found a good teacher for them. We try to inculcate good reading or learning habits, and maybe it's still not really working as well. So what can we do? And I guess that's where we stepped in, whereby we provide a conducive learning environment. We have online systems to help them, and it's always a learning process. It's always like we work with parents, and parents work with us. And I mean, I think every single educator and every single teacher will always say that, hey, obviously we hope that parents can supervise more at home and stuff. But we also understand that parents are actually busy as well. And I think it's really, that's why you have small little motivational tools, or it also comes down to the scale of the teacher to really get kids to be willing to revise and enjoy learning the language lah. Yeah. So I mean, shameless plug from my end.
Thanks so much. So parents, we still have some more time left. If you have any question, do feel free to ask then. Because I think today's topic is more on AI, but I think like what Dan has mentioned, AI is a tool just like the books and the many other things that you have at home. Yeah. And what we both of us believe is actually the parents' involvement in the child in making it interesting for the child to learn Chinese at home. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post in the comment box or share with your friends if you think that this video will benefit your friends. Yeah. Okay, then I think probably we can also, I think it's a nice way to wrap up here. Because I think I know that you know a lot of things in a sense of the AI scope as well as the factors that drive the AI as well as integrates the parents' learning and teaching of the kids and helping the child to like Chinese. Oh, there's so many things. Yeah. So what would be okay if a parent comes to you and say, and then I like everything that you have said. Yeah. So now I go back home. I'm a bit lost. So what can I do first?
Yeah, sure. For sure.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, one thing that we would recommend is, you can always go to our website, which we will post afterwards. It's actually learn.kidstartnow.com. We provide, free signups for, free trials. You can go in, you can try exploring some of the stories that we provide, some of the quizzes and some of the pet battles that we create as a way to actually get kids to engage your kids in Chinese. And on the behind the scenes, we have our proprietary algorithm that optimizes everything for your child, such that learning Chinese is fun and effective. I think I strongly believe in one thing, which is that it's definitely a process. It's a combination. It's a working thing between us and parents. And what we try to do is to try to make the revision process or the learning process as painless or as fun or as efficient as possible, such that you have more time with your kids. Your kids can have more time to do other things. Yeah.
Awesome.
That will be the key, I guess, takeaway from all of this.
Awesome. Yeah. So in a sense, it's really to help the parents to be more involved, and part of your many tools could be books and the AI, but also do remember to work with the teachers. Yeah, exactly. And it's always a two-way thing. Yes. Yep. Okay, then thanks so much for sharing. So you're saying the website is actually learn.kidstartnow, is it?
Yes. Let me send to you.
Yeah, you send to me and then I will just drop it in the Facebook comments. So when the parents watch it again, they will see it. Yeah.
Yep. I sent it to you.
Okay, great. I posted inside the chat box, as in the Facebook comments.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, we still have one last question, and it's a question that I always ask my guests. Okay, yeah. Okay, so I know that you are very young. Yeah, so let me bring you back to your younger days. And again, right now, the 12 years old have just collected their PSLE results, and it's a big milestone for all of us, which include you and me.
Yeah.
So what if I may invite you to go down the memory lane and you bump into your younger self, the 12-year-old you. Yeah. So what will you say to yourself if you meet him?
Hmm. Well, I mean, just put some context here. I was a very, very late bloomer. I only started speaking at 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in P1, my primary school teachers told my parents that they had to be prepared, that they had to look after me forever.
Oh
Because
dear.
I was really, really, really slow. And I didn't do that well for PSLE.
Mm-hmm.
So, but eventually I still managed to, do pretty well for JC, got a scholarship and stuff. So I
Awesome.
think that the biggest thing that I would tell myself is don't give up. And I mean it's a cliche, but PSLE doesn't define you. It
Mm-hmm.
merely is just one step along the way. You might not have gone if let's say you did not go to the secondary school that you wanted, it doesn't matter. It only matters if you give up at this point. If you label yourself, if you let other people feel that, if you let yourself think that just because I didn't get into the school that I wanted to go to,
Mm-hmm.
I am not capable of more or better results or greater success in the future. As long as you don't let that define you, you're fine. So just tell yourself that this is just one step. Tomorrow will be better. I'm just going to start working hard again.
Mm. So tomorrow will be better.
It's always better.
Yes, and I hope that this is also it acts as some form of encouragements for parents with kids who didn't do as well as what the parents have expected. Yeah, yeah. So it's a new stage, it's a new phase. Yeah. So move on and always look forward.
Thanks for having me, John.
Yes. Then thanks so much for being here. Yeah. So we'll catch up. Yeah.
Yeah, we catch up soon.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
I'll see you again.
Yep.
Thanks for your time, man.
No
Take care.
problem.
Take care.
Okay.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye, parents. Thanks for being here as well.